Good morning, everyone. My name is Chanel Crawford, and I am from Citibank. I work in emerging technologies, and I'm here at our convention today because I did a little work on the Common Cloud Controls project. Uh, I think we started it with Jim Adams, and it's kind of grown to be the beast that it is today. What we're going to talk about today is how non-technical contributions drive project success. The one topic, I'm sorry, what we're going to talk about today is the one topic that rarely makes it into GitHub trending, and that is the individuals that do not write the code, right? Now, before the developers in the room start clutching their keyboards, I'm not here to take away your commits. What I'm here to do is to put a little bit of light on the invisible infrastructure of non-technical contributions. Often open source is described as a movement powered by code, right? But that's not entirely true, right? It's powered by humans. Can we agree with that? And probably some caffeine, confusion, and Slack threads 400 messages deep. Can we agree with that? Well, here's a fact that might surprise you, or maybe not. Most open source projects fail, not because the code was bad, but because the communication was. There was no roadmap, no documentation, no community management, and without those things, it's hard for an open source project to survive. Non-technical contributors are the maintainers of meaning. They turn great software into sustainable ecosystems. And in a world where AI can write Python functions faster than most humans can type a tweet, documentation, governance, and empathy are quickly becoming the new competitive advantage. As technical contributors, I'm sure most of you are, it is also to your benefit to glean some of these non-technical skills in the AI world, since it's writing a lot of code as of late. So today we're going to look beyond the code base and dig into the imperative presence of non-technical contributions. We'll talk a little bit about, technical contributions versus non-technical contributions. We'll talk about something called the multiplier effect, how big of an impact non-technical contributions are on open source projects. And we can't leave here without talking about AI, right? So we'll touch on that a little bit as well. So let's start a little bit busting a few myths, right? Code is king. Code is vital, right? But it's not sovereign. Open source has long treated code as the only source of currency of value. If you can't compile, you can't fix bugs, you can't do features or APIs, then you can't truly contribute to an open source project. These are imperative for project success, yes. However, non-technical contributors maintain the ecosystem around the code. And some of those tasks include writing documentation, designing logos, user experience, and putting together these fancy technical conferences we're here in today. Let's put it like this. If code is king, then documentation is the royal translator and community managers are the therapist of the group, right? Because what keeps open source alive isn't just the commits, it's coordination. And I like to think, honestly, open source has a little bit of a hero complex, right? We love the lone developer pushing commits at 2 o'clock in the morning, right? But here's the truth. Open source projects don't fail because of bad code. We know this, right? They fail because we can't scale the humans around the code. When we figure out how to scale the humans around the code, we get a positive impact called the multiplier effect. Anybody ever heard of the multiplier effect? They call it the multiplier effect on engineering output, or meow, a little bit. It's basically an illustration of what happens when non-technical contributors are in abundance, right? Documentation, governance, user experience, all of these now become productivity amplifiers. Every hour saved through clarity compounds across all contributors, right? Non-technical work compounds technical output. And this is how it works. When documentation is clear, an engineer doesn't spend 3 hours trying to decipher cryptic error messages, right? They're spending those 3 hours building. When a project manager sets realistic milestones, developers aren't juggling chaos, trying to answer questions and write code. Instead, they're delivering predictable results. When a community manager resolves a conflict, you know these things happen, you don't lose your best contributor because there was an argument. The team keeps its velocity up top. Every minute saved by removing some type of friction multiplies across every single contributor. That's compounding productivity. It's like giving every engineer a second brain, but not through AI, through organization, clarity, and communication. Without these non-technical contributions, projects we know will slow down, morale decreases, and technical debt piles up. But with them, suddenly, one developer's output feels like 3. And it's not because he's superhuman or anything like that. He's just not bogged down with all the extra things that non-technical contributors handle. So let's talk about building the infrastructure that builds the infrastructure. Non-technical work builds the meta infrastructure, systems that enable sustainable technical work. Documentation builds comprehension infrastructure. Documentation leads architect, communication, and sustain the human interface of the code base. Governance builds trust infrastructure. Governance makes corporations believe that your project is legitimate. Community views continuity infrastructure. Community managers make contributors feel like they're safe. And design and communication builds adoption infrastructure. Designers make adopters believe this is usable, right? Investing in these systems increases of the project's capacity, not just its velocity. Non-technical contributors do not build the product. They build the systems that allow the product to be built reliably and repeatedly. When you invest in these systems, building capacity that keeps open source projects from collapsing under your own brilliance. What happens without them? Well, brilliant code, 0 users. Nobody understands it, nobody's gonna use it. Developer burnout, they're already crazy busy building code. They don't need to organize events and answer documentation questions, things of that nature. Confusing onboarding. New contributors lose interest really quickly if they can't figure out what's going on. Chaotic communities, of course, if all of that's going on, nobody is working together. And then with all of that, of course, there's missed opportunities to collaborate. Let's talk about the long game, sustainability, the difference between a project that becomes a movement and one that becomes a memory. Sustainability is human. Code survives when communities stay engaged, right? Technology evolves fast, but it's people who sustain progress. The moment engagement drops, even the strongest code loses its future. Retention over recruitment, right? Open source thrives when contributors feel seen and valued. Retaining invested people is a lot easier and cheaper than always onboarding new ones. And in my role with the CCC project, I was always, as the PM of the project and getting it off the road, shouted out when releases came. And that's why I'm here today. And this was over a year ago. So retention is good. Governance creates trust. Strong governance isn't bureaucracy, it's clarity. It keeps collaboration fair, transparent, and aligned through transitions. And of course, diversity. It also drives resilience. Diverse contributors, different perspectives, and reduces burnout and tunnel vision. We've got to evolve with context, right? Adapt to new regulations and tech and contributor needs, right? We've got a new administration in. All the laws around distributed ledger technology, for example, have relaxed. So as we build systems, we have to be able to adjust to those as well. And at its core, care is infrastructure. It's about stewardship. Open source is about stewardship. It endures when people care enough to maintain, mentor, and have accountability. All right, so we talked a little bit about what non-technical contributions are, compared to technical contributions. And I'm sure you're probably wondering, okay, we need non-technical people. What do we do to get them? One, stop talking like a compiler. Create human readable invites. Sell impact, not chores. Help thousands learn our tools, not please come fix these typos. It sounds kind of boring, doesn't it? Make onboarding painless. Instead, if contributing feels like the periodic table, you probably lost them from the very beginning. Make it as simple as possible. Celebrate the non-code wins. Anytime someone puts together something or looks over a document, let them know that they're grateful for that. And give real titles. Community architect sounds a lot better than helpful person. And with that being said, let's go ahead and let's talk a little bit about AI's disruption and opportunity. We know AI is automating many, many tasks, especially code generation, right? We got GitHub Copilot, ChatGPT, and it's predicted that by 2030, 60% of open source contributions may involve AI mediation. Humans will now steer context, trust, community, and other non-technical things outside of raw code. AI is writing more code every day, but it still can't write documentation that makes sense, resolve a GitHub argument politely, or convince a Fortune 500 company to adopt your project. That's human infrastructure, and it's non-technical contributors who build it. AI now writes syntax level code better than junior developers. That will commoditize low-level contributions, and non-technical work now becomes the quality assurance layer. What's scarce now? Contextual reasoning, ethical judgment, documentation, and governance. That being said, AI can generate a README, but it can't generate empathy. It can summarize a pull request, but it can't mediate an argument. It can also optimize syntax, but not community trust. The easier it becomes to code, the harder it becomes to lead. Here's the paradox. As AI accelerates the writing of code, the relative value of human contribution is going to increase. So the barrier to coding drops, the barrier to leading rises. The future of open source belongs to those who can orchestrate collaboration, not just commits. And the final thought, every great project starts with a pull request, right? And it survives because of the people who explain, document, and connect it. Thank you for your time. Yes. Yes.
Hi.
How are you?
What do you think is the biggest kind of barrier for non-technical people to get engaged in open source?
I think the biggest barrier is the onboarding process, the documentation that's out there, or how to even start. As I said in the PowerPoint, it's like, if you have invites that are made for the average person and not highly technical, readable, ingestible invites and ingestible instructions, more people will be more willing to come forward and use their skill set to help.
Fear of the unknown.
Yes, exactly. So the easier it is to understand what the ask is, understand what the project is, the easier it is for someone to come to add to value to the project. Any other questions? All right, I hope I made you laugh a little bit. Have a good day.